It is now the top of the hour, 5 p.m. Welcome to the Packet Hacking Village in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. How's everyone doing today? We have plenty of seats. Please make yourselves at home. And now it is my absolute pleasure. When we received this CFP for this talk, it was an offer that we could not refuse. We have a legendary guest speaker coming up right now. He will be talking about doing penetration testing, doing threat intelligence with Evernote. He has been in the community and security for a long time, 15 plus years. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you our guest speaker, Grecs.
Alrighty, thank you for that awesome introduction. Who here is a big fan of Evernote? Who uses Evernote? Everybody? Okay, I can't see too many people, but I love Evernote. And what that has caused me to do is try to look at ways that I can apply Evernote in my day-to-day job. And one of the things I'm going to talk a little bit about today is threat intel. Where I work, we didn't really have a repository for where we could store a lot of the information that's out there. And so what I started doing was trying to pull in all this open source data, because I couldn't put like the internal stuff, but I started pulling all the open source intel into Evernote so that I could do my own research and do my own note annotation and fun stuff like that. So this has been a project that's probably been going for about 6-7 months. I have about, and you'll see a little bit later, I have about 50,000 pieces of information in Evernote. And the nice thing about Evernote is it's currently, you pay $50 per year, and you can put however much data you want into the entire system. So it's a pretty good deal, and it's great for people that just want to create their own repositories of cool stuff so that they can go back and search. All right, so here's my traditional disclaimer, right? So this is me, nobody else. Okay, so a little bit about me. I've been in industry for about 20 years. The past 16 have been focused exclusively in cybersecurity. The past 5 to 6 years, I've also been working in an operational environment. Cut my teeth early on, about 17 years back, doing web application security. Did security engineering. I'm in the federal government space, so did a little bit of FISMA, found out I could write. They put me on props, so that was really not fun. Eventually, I wanted to go back to my roots and start doing more technology-focused stuff. So I got into doing trade studies, doing analysis of different products. And like I said, I'm transitioned into working in a security operations center, and I do a lot of security training related with that. So probably back in 2008, I'm proud, so this, I don't know, it's about 7 years old now, but I created this website. It's focused on stuff going on and that's of interest to people in the metro Washington, D.C. area, so novainfosec.com. And so all like my slides and my bio and stuff, you can go there and check it out. And it's a history of what I've done probably over the past 8 years. Now to the point, this is what I'm going to cover today. Just a little bit of background about how I got here. Talk about, there were 3 components that led me to using Evernote as a threat intel platform. So the first part of that was dashboarding. The second part of it is the secret weapon. Does anybody know what the secret weapon is? No, all right. It's a pretty cool thing, right? And then the 3 legs of threat intel. There are multiple legs, but I'm just going to focus on 3. And then finally, trying to pull all that stuff together so that how you can use Evernote as a threat intel repo. And obviously, if you're working for a large corporation, they're probably not going to want you to use Evernote, right? So the whole concept here is to take the lessons learned that we learned from doing this project, the structure, the framework, and use that maybe in other platforms. So that's where the alternative stuff comes from. And then lastly, the future, what we're going to focus on. So first, a little bit of the background. What I often find in industry is that, especially with large enterprises, we have a tendency to overcomplicate things. I've always followed the keep it simple, stupid philosophy. There's a lot of things that I just think there's simple solutions, but you end up going through this whole requirements analysis and design, and you build it, and then at the end, no one ever even wants to use it, right? So I'm more of focused on the agile. Take the resources that we have and use that more effectively. And the example that I often gave is like a simple onboarding workflow. So they went out and built this whole system of how they were going to onboard people to a contract. In the end, what ended up working is they just created a file structure, and they had an inbox, submitted, and approved, and it was nothing more than moving a Word doc between those different systems. So that's kind of an example of what I'm talking about. All those other previous things that they built, they were just not flexible. So this system was simple, and it seemed to work, and it got the job done. And it's solutions like that I like to focus on. So one of the other philosophies that I have is that a lot of times you have these needs. And so the first thing is, an organization gets popped, and so they go out and they buy all these expensive commercial software, but without really knowing what they need. So one of the philosophies that I always have too is use the tools that you have and use the smart people that you have to build a pilot solution, essentially to figure out what your true requirements are. In the end, that pilot solution might be just the thing that you need, and you can just evolve that. But at the end of it, if it's not, you can at least identify the gaps that it doesn't fill and use that understanding so that you can best buy the commercial product that's going to solve your needs, versus just trying to go out and pick some general security product. And I'm also a big advocate of investing in people and process first. And that follows this philosophy where you go in and you figure out what can be done first with what you have. And then once you identify the gaps, that gives you the requirements so that you can best go out and pick the products that are going to meet those needs. So how this whole project started is so I was working as an analyst, and like I said, I was looking to take advantage of open source intel. There's all this cool stuff, but I was always looking for one place where I could go search it. I mean, I could Google it and things like that, but I didn't have a central repository where I could do stuff. So it was just a little frustrating there. So restrictions, my organization, and still to this day, even after I've left, they didn't really provide an option. And because it was for a federal government agency, there was no option for me to just build something internally, like just set my own server. I don't know. Does anybody out there work in government that's like not a Fed? But all right. So it's really hard. Trust me, it's like you just can't stand up this server and put your stuff on it. It's like a year-long process just to stand up a single server. So what I wanted to do was build my own. I wanted it hosted externally, but I wanted it to be something that I could access from within the org or without the org. So the requirements of what I was looking for was just a bucket that I could just dump all this cool stuff into. So there's a lot of nice blogs that put out some nice reports. So I wanted to dump that in there. There were data-driven feeds, so there's a lot of RSS type stuff. There's a lot of Twitter feeds. So that, and then also data files. There's a lot of like malware domain list and stuff like that you could go and you can grab those text files on a periodic basis and just dump them into your bucket, right? And then also anything else. There's a some vendor comes out with new APT report, right? All right, I just want to click a thing and dump it there and just be able to use it. I wanted a system that would allow me to easily find stuff. So I wanted it to be searchable, maybe support some sort of category or tagging type thing so that I can view the information in different ways. And the last thing is that I didn't really want to maintain my own system. I mean, I could, and that would be really cool, but I'm lazy. So I was looking for a system that was already out there that I could just use. So I was looking for something cloud-based, and that it would be accessible from anywhere. And this last point here is, I know there's a lot of threat intel feeds that have like IPs and domains and stuff like that, and they are great whenever you pull that data and you put it into, your IDS systems or whatever. It works great there. But what I was looking for is something more from an analyst perspective. Like an alert comes up and I have a domain or an IP and I want to go and kind of search through and see, has my bucket, do I have anything in there associated with it yet? And then the context behind it, the source that it came from. Like if it was part of a blog post and they mentioned it in IP, being able to read that whole blog post and understand. So it was definitely focused less on, using, there's some protocols out there like Stix and Taxi, and it was more focused on me as an analyst and helping me do my job better. All right, so I'm just going to quickly, this is a little boring, but so how this whole thing started was way back in the day, I was assigned this task where I was going to do dashboarding. And so this was for a SOC, and they essentially wanted this dashboard so that management could go to it and get a view, and they could see graphs and see what their risk is. So I've used risk, and I looked at the components that made up risk, and based on vulnerability data and threat data, I was able to, come up with some numbers and multiply that out and basically give them this risk score. So that's how this whole thing started. But then I moved on from that job, but there was always like a lot of great stuff. And as an analyst, I wanted to be able to stay on top of what was going on, just staying on top of the situational awareness. So a long time ago, there was Google Reader, right? And so I would basically take all those feeds that I did in that prior job, and I would pull them into Google Reader, and I would break them down into those same categories. And it worked well. And the cool thing, who remembers iGoogle? They had the home page, right? So what the cool thing with Google Reader is you could create a category, and then you could put a bunch of feeds into that, and then you could get that category and all the feeds associated with it, and you could put it into an iGadget, like one of these little iGadget things here. So I basically, and you can't see it here because this was a few years back, and so I couldn't really recreate like what I used to see, but but I had one, threat, vulnerability, and then just some situational awareness type stuff, and then that allowed me as an analyst to just keep up with things. Eventually, unfortunately, iGoogle went away, so that was really not too great. So I had to move on to Feedly, and that was good, but as you can see on the right-hand side, it didn't give me that same look and feel of a dashboard that I could just skim over and understand what was going on. So recently, I'd say about a year ago, I moved to a new system called where is it? Oh, a NetVibes. So does anybody use NetVibes? So it's this free dashboarding system, cloud hosted, that you can just log in and you can suck in Twitter feeds and RSS feeds, and there's some other data types. So I basically recreated that dashboard so that I could stay on top of things there. So what I basically found about all these dashboarding solutions is that it was really nice for, like blog type feeds, like maybe 1, 2, or 3, or 4 feeds would come out, or 4 posts would come out per day. But with the data-driven feeds, it was just too hard, because you would have like the Zeus botnet tracker, that would spit out like 100 IPs, and so it didn't really work too well for the dashboarding thing. Now they do have, Feedly Pro or NetVibes, where you can subscribe to those feeds, and it'll actually archive it for you and allow you to search it. But it was damn expensive, so I didn't want to do that. And then the other thing too, for those big domain, those text files that you could download that have like bad IPs, bad domain lists, it didn't have a way to suck those in too. So the next part, and I'm going to talk about the secret weapon, and this is where I started getting into Evernote. So previously I just used it a little bit, but I started using the secret weapon, and what that is a method of using Evernote to do the getting things done to-do methodology. Who uses getting things done in some way, shape, or form? Anybody? So we got a few out there waving hands. Usually I used to treat Evernote as just this notebook that I would write stuff down, and maybe every few days I would create a new note and just start from there. But what this showed is it was actually using Evernote as more of a database type system. So they basically treated Evernote itself as a database system, and the notebook would be a table, and then the notes that are in that notebook is essentially just a free-form record. You can put anything you want there, text, pictures, whatever. So the organization is, they had these nested notebooks. So essentially you would have your traditional notebooks, but then you would have tasks, and you would have action pending and completed, and those were the two main notebooks. And so you would usually start out with everything being in action pending, and then you could move it to the completed folder when it was done. But the real power came in with using Evernote's tagging system. So they basically did a who, what, when, where. And if you're familiar with with getting things done, that's the philosophy that they have. So they came up with, and you can see it to the right here, where they had this nested ways. So they did what? So those are the projects on, and you could have multiple tasks associated with that project. They had importance, so going from 0, or an exclamation point, which is stuff that you would do on a daily basis, all the way to, hey, now this is stuff that I'm going to do like today or tomorrow, right? And then next, and then soon, and then it goes all the way down to the someday maybe. So this is where you can just keep this list of things that, hey, I want to climb Mount Everest, right? Or you can just put fun stuff like that. And then also waiting, which is a powerful concept. So that was more of, hey, I send you an email and I sent this task off to you. So it's no longer something that I'm going to be focusing on now or next. This is something that I'm waiting for. So then I can, periodically, I could go to my waiting list and I could, follow up, say, oh, I haven't heard from this person in a week. Let me follow up with them. So, and then where, that's a big GTD concept, stuff that you can do at home, at work, and then also who. People that you may need to interact with to get that task done. But in most cases, you're combining all these. So you can say, hey, this is a work project. I need that I'm working with John, and it has 10 tasks, and I'm working on the first task. All right, and then where it's going to be work, and then who I'm going to be working with. And the cool thing about this is you can create these saved searches in Notebook, where you combine, the notebook that you want to look in along with all these all these tags. And so you can come up with a list of things like, hey, this is what I need to do at work today or tomorrow, or this is what I need to do at home today, tomorrow. So it basically took Evernote as just being this one-off system where you could just dump data in and search for it and really treat it as more of a database system. So now that's just one method. You can customize it, and then that's the most powerful thing about GTD is you can get in and come up, take their basic philosophy and customize it. And then this is just the basic philosophy that I used. I just had some identifier symbols, and I carried the symbols through so that the exclamation point essentially followed through. And then I was using dots to indicate headers of the tag hierarchies, as you can see there. But you can basically make those however you want. So the next part that I wanted to talk to in terms of building this story is, 3 legs of threat intel. And this is, I'm mostly focusing on open source, but also information sharing and case tracking. So threat intel, I know most people don't have, there's a lot of value there. I can definitely see that. But what I basically find in terms of surveying people that have used a lot of these systems is that it isn't really that useful. A lot of times, just feeding the data directly into your defensive systems, it produces a lot of false positives. And so you really have to be selective of the type of data that you're going to use. And then this gets back to that initial philosophy that I was talking about, where you don't just buy this threat intel feed and throw it into your system. You have to kind of understand what your problem space is first, and then work with the threat intel vendor to give the data that you need. But most people just go out there and they say, hey, threat intel feed, this is like the cool thing, right? So I need one too, right? It's going to help me defend better. But a lot of people that I talk to, whenever you do that, they're really not finding it too useful. So, they basically said that, going out, just keeping up with blogs, following the right people on Twitter, they get more value. I mean, and it's not necessarily a threat intel feed companies issue, or maybe it is because they're not selling the right thing, because the company that's looking for it doesn't understand what their true problem is. But basically the problem is you get a lot of data that's not relevant to your organization in most cases, and a lot of times it ends up perhaps distracting you from the real threats that you do have. So just talking about some of the different types of intel that's out there. So open source. So we talked a little bit about this. So you have these basic building block things like IPs, domains, URLs, etc. And then you have the reports that come out. And to me, that's more threat intel, where they have a specific actor and what their TTPs are. So there's those two, and that's at the bottom and the top of the spectrum, and there's a lot of different hybrid products between there. But historically, there's a lot of different open source resources. So I just listed a few there. Malware, Domain List, Zeus Tracker, and don't forget social networks. There are a lot of people nowadays are doing some fun projects that are out there with honeypots, and they automatically tweet stuff out, or maybe there's somebody, like I know one guy that he actually, like his work lets him tweet stuff out that he finds, and so I definitely follow him. It's DA_667 if anyone wants to follow him, but he's a great guy. What? Okay. So then mix in, or speaking of honeypots, try to mix in your organizational data as well, because this will enrich some of the data that you have there. So not open source per se, but it's, you can put honeypots on the inside of your network, on the outside, and no one theoretically should know about those. So when something hits those, that definitely gives you something to chase after. Well, this IP hit my honeypot. What else have they been doing within my organization? And then also the commercial. And like I said, there's definitely a market for where the commercial fits in, but we have to understand what our problem is first. So there's a bunch of existing solutions. So Crits is a nice system. SIF, Critical Stack, and so Crits and SIF, those are two open source projects that'll go and pull in feeds to, it sucks in intel from different open source feeds and allows you to store those within your own repository, do some annotation. Critical Stack is a nice solution too. I mean, and I'm not like a super tech person, right? But I was able to set it up in like about 10 minutes. So I was able to suck in about 96 feeds, and then you would just run the script to update it maybe on a daily basis. And what it does is it pulls in the data from all those feeds, pulls the indicators out, dedupes them. So it's a really nice system. And then a lot of this data too, the vendors, like if you get an IDS system or an IPS system or a firewall or whatever, right? Most of them have an add-on package that they will have their own custom threat intel feeds to for blocking or whatever, and that's usually like an add-on. So there's a lot of stuff out there, but what I really found is the big need in terms of pulling all this stuff together is I was looking for a big, like somewhere where I could store this, that big bucket that I was going to talk about. And I bet nobody can guess what that big bucket is, right? All right, so intel sharing. So there's a lot of groups out there. I'm in the government sector, so these are, there's the different ISACs, the DIB, InfraGard. There's a lot of good stuff there. Historically, what I've seen is this collaboration has taken place over email, bulletin boards. Some of the newer formats is that they're starting to push out this intel sharing information through using standard protocols like TAXI and Sticks. But once again, there's a lot of threat intel that you can get from your partners, but where do I put that? And what's, at least for me, what's that big bucket that I'm throwing everything into that my analysts can search to get contacts behind the indicators that they're seeing? And then the last one that I want to focus on is looking at your past cases or your past incidents that you investigated. There's a lot of useful stuff there, but once again, and it's pretty simple. There's solutions like ART, like open source type stuff, like RRT is probably the most popular, but there's commercial ones too, obviously Remedy, and SharePoint even has a nice little, like if you do default install of SharePoint, there's a built-in case tracking system there too that you can use. But once again, what I see is from the analyst's perspective is there's no one place where they can go and find all their case tracking system, their data that comes from their partners, and then also some of the open source stuff. So there are some solutions out there that are kind of cool. There's a company that I've been tracking for the past few months called Threat Connect. And the thing that I like most about it is you can join it and start using it for free. So they do a lot of things. They pull in some open source feeds. They have a basic case tracking system. And they're also you can do, like they have groups, and then you can do sharing with your partners there too. And the cool thing is it's one interface where I can search on an indicator and I can essentially see, where has that occurred from the data that I got from my partners, from all the OS int, and it can even suck in if you want to pay some of the feeds for the commercial vendors too. So it's kind of this one platform that you can do things to. And I'm sure there's other ones out there. This is just one that I found, and they gave me an account, and I liked it because it was free to join, just to try out. So, but overall, there's the thing that I'm saying is that there's a lot of point solutions out there, and they do one thing well, but they don't all combine together. They're very structured. So if you want to change it, it's very difficult. What I wanted to do was look for something that was very easy to use and flexible. Anybody from your CEO down to your analyst should be able to use it. And I go back to that onboarding process, right, that I talked about first. Like the CEO knows how to move a Word file between inbox, submitted, approved, right? And so does your analyst. So as an analogy, I wanted something that anyone could use, and I wanted a centralized database to not only store some of the threat intel resources that I talked about here, but there's a lot of other things that you may want to throw in there too, like asset databases and fun stuff, right? But the thing is I wanted one place to just store that in, where an analyst could just go in and search and find all the relevant stuff that they need. So that's where I came up in terms of what I was looking for, was trying to use Evernote. And this is really focused on OS in currently, but there's a lot of other things that you could easily do with this. So this is where it all pulls together. You basically had the dashboarding that I talked about first, some of the lessons learned that I had there, the secret weapon, right? So really took using Evernote to the next level. And then lastly, threat intel and just all the awesome resources that are out there, so that you're using Evernote as this Intel repo. But it's basically, you set up a notebook, you come up with some standardized hierarchy of tags. It's open, it's flexible. You don't have to, they take care of all the heavy stuff. I don't have to set up like my own big data system or whatever. I can just pay $50 a year and just use their stuff, right? But it's basically, you set all this up, and then you start dumping feeds and data into it, and you try to automate that as much as possible. So basically, trying to archive a lot of that data into one place. You can go in and you can search like on an IP, and then depending on what you find there, you can pivot off that and go in other areas too. But one of the things from an analyst perspective that I really like is that you can go in and you can find a piece of intel. Maybe it was a prior case, maybe it was from an OS int resource, maybe it was from a partner, but you can go in and actually just annotate, like, hey, yeah, this was good or whatever, or you can add tags to it, or to basically give context to it so that you can find it later, and also other analysts can also use that. And then just basically doing automation to dump all that stuff into it. If you ever are surfing the web and you find some cool article, there's browser add-ons that you can say add to Evernote and just dumps it there, right? So it's very easy to get stuff in. So this is what I've initially focused on. Once again, going back to my dashboarding days, focused on breaking down things into threat, vulnerability, and then the last one that I have there is situational awareness. Like if you find an IP that did something a week ago, being able to go back and search through different blog posts to see what was going on around that time. But these are some of the resources, so there's a bunch of RSS feeds that I'm pushing in. There's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of different resources out there on Twitter, some vulnerability stuff, And then some of the situational awareness, I'm currently just looking at the SANS ISC blog, and there's one I recently added called Threat Brief, which is really just a great place. It just keeps up to date with all the news, and they put out about 4 or 5 blog posts per day. So this is just a quick look at what it looks like in the Evernote client on the Mac, and this is focusing on just the OSN int stuff. So you can basically go through and multi-select these tags to essentially find the data that you're looking for. So the question is how do I automate this? Well, I'm lazy, right? So I went out there and I didn't want to manage my whole system. So I went out and at least initially tried to use some simple methods that were out there first. So Evernote has an awesome way of getting stuff into it. You literally just email whatever you want they give you a special Evernote email address that no one else knows, and you just mail it to yourself. And depending on the data that you put in the subject, that varies, what notebook it goes into and what tags to add to it. So there's if this, then that. So very popular service. And there's a competing service that's a little bit more powerful called Zapier, but you can only do so many recipes and then there's a fee for it. But with just if this, then that, it's easy to implement. There is a limit of only getting partial data. So as an example, if there's a great blog and they have an RSS feed and you want an archive of all that, a lot of times, because it's based on the RSS feed, you're only going to get like the first 250 words or whatever. So there is a limit there. So you can, write your own RSS scraper, or I found a tool costs like $20. So you can implement it on your own server, or you can pay so much per month and use our hosted solution called 5Filter. And what they'll do is take partial RSS feeds and turn them into full RSS feeds. So if this, then that, and Zapier both have email integration. So if you subscribe to a mailing list, you could say, hey, well, whenever something comes into my inbox that's from this mailing list, add a note for it in Evernote too. StormSack, I haven't really played with it, but I heard if you want to do something in-house, it's an open source clone that gives you if this, then that sort of capability. And then lastly, scripts. So one of the things that I haven't been able to do yet is, I was talking about those text files that you would want to pull in on a periodic basis that have the bad IPs, bad domains, fun stuff like that. I hadn't been able to figure that out. And so with the help of some of my friends on the Nova Hackers email list, I was able to somebody helped me write a simple bash script, and so I put together a basic script that'll go out to some of these sites. It'll pull that new text file down, check if it's changed since the last time that I checked. If it's changed, then it imports it into Evernote through the email capability that I was talking about. And then, once again, there's also the critical stack and the SIF feed tools that are very useful too. If that's your thing, at least for me, this is something that I haven't implemented yet, but it's because I'm more interested in the context, but it's something that I'm considering, getting all that data and pushing it in there too, using some sort of scripting. For those that have never used if this, then that before, this is just, this is usually one big screen that you just scroll down, but you basically, this is one that I created. This is a SSH Brute Twitter account. And so I basically, you select it. Hey, I'm going to follow this Twitter account. You give it a title. And you basically say, well, the trigger is if SSH Brute, if there's a new tweet, then I'm going to create a note, and there's these standard fields that look like that, the notebook that you want to put it in, and then the tags associated with that. And you just build the recipe and run it, and it works. And you do that for and it's basically the same method for like if you're doing like an RSS feed or Twitter, or you're monitoring an inbox. And this was this was the script that I created, especially for going out and trying to get the malwaredomains.com, their domain list. So, like I said, this basically goes out, pulls that data down, does the hash of it, compares it with the previous hash. If the hash is the same, it just ignores it. If the hash changes, then it basically takes that and sends it off to the Evernote email list. So that's Amir M, and I didn't know if he wanted me to say his name, so I just kept it kind of vague like that. But thank you if you're here. Thanks. So some of the other things that I wanted to touch on too, just to close things out, Intel sharing, right? So pretty simple, right? All I do is I create an Evernote notebook, right? And then I share it out to the people that I want to share with. Now, whenever you want to share data, you just add, like any of your partners, just add a new note to it, right? Simple, works, right? You don't need to build some, you don't need to go and buy some super huge commercial software, or, just simple, the whole KISS philosophy. And then also case tracking, whenever you create a new case, basically you create it and then you tag it with open and you work it. And so then you would move the tag over to be working, and then whenever you're done with it, you would tag it to close. Now there's some other things that you could do here, like you could have a notebooks of adversaries. So these are, as you build your intel and you learn more and more about one adversary, you can start building a note for, or have a notebook, and within that note, each note would be associated with a particular adversary. And the cool thing about that is I can tag that with my case tracking system. So I could easily look at a particular adversary and see all the cases that are associated with that. Maybe if there was the open source feed or my partner feeds, seeing the source of where I got that. And you can do the same things with every adversary. You could map it to have a notebook for campaigns and do that same cross-referencing. Associated with campaigns, there's waves and then individual attacks, and then also having an indicator database. So you basically have a notebook that is, every note is an indicator of some sort. So I could go and I could look at an IP or a domain, and I could essentially cross-reference that with the adversaries, campaigns, waves, the cases that are associated with it, and then lastly, where I got that from partners or if it was from open source. So this was my kind of quick cut at creating, using the secret weapon, who, what, when, where philosophy. And so I tried to customize it some where when represents a priority or the confidence of the information that you got. The what, you would have case tracking, and for the OSINT DB, you could have the source. And then that kind of aligns with the who on the right here, because NIST has multiple sources, right? So I could have things like, NIST, NVD, and then they also have another one called NVD Analyze. So that's a way of saying like who it came from, but then also mapping it to those specific feeds. And then where I'm using this as sort of a workflow or state. So, for case tracking, I already talked about inbox working closed, right? For intel sharing, no tag basically means new, but maybe somebody looks at it and they determine that it's junk or it's just not relevant. So you could tag it with either relevant or irrelevant. And then the same thing with the OSINT database as well, if it's useful or useless. And I had to sort of play with these because I had to use different words because I couldn't use, relevant and irrelevant like for the OSINT DB because they're using the same tagging structure and it would they would cross the streams. And then lastly, who, all right, well, who worked this case? Intel sharing, who it came from, and then lastly, like I talked about, who the OSINT came from. But the big thing here is you don't have to go through and manually tag all these things, right? You can only really tag it if it's relevant. Obviously, with the OSINT database, you can auto tag that because that's somewhat automated. And then you can use your primary tags here, which would be the case tracking, so that would essentially be your case number, and you could use that to cross-reference to these two sources, as well as some of those other things, like the adversary, the indicator database, campaigns, waves, all that kind of fun stuff. So how do we find all this stuff? Evernote is great in terms of searching capability. So there's the tags. You can literally just search by tags. You can do basic search where you just put in normal text data and just search for it. And they also have advanced search. So you can go in and specify, like, I only want to look at this notebook in notes that have these tags and maybe terms, and then they can even put dates there too. Like, I only want to look for notes that were created between this time and that time. And by default, all of these are ANDed together. So then what you can do is you can create a saved search for certain types of data that you may want to look at on a regular basis. So an example here is maybe, you get hit with something, right? And the only thing you have is the IP. So you could go into your Evernote database and you could search for that particular IP. And then maybe based on what you find there, you would get some sort of a timeline. So then you could run maybe a secondary search around, like maybe from a news perspective, what happened around that timeline. And then also discover maybe similar attacks using that timeline approach as well. So this is just a quick shot of what it looked like, or what it looks like currently that I took right before this presentation. If you can see, like right down in this corner here, I have about 50,000 notes that I've collected, I'd say over the past 4 or 5 months. So we have all the different, this is focused on the open source Intel. So looking at the what, and then also the specific feeds, and then these down here you can see where it starts with the caret. That's who the source is. And I actually have it loaded up in a browser, but I think you guys get the feel for it. So the last thing that I wanted to touch was alternatives. Obviously, maybe if you're like a small shop and you have nothing to hide, right? You could perhaps start out using Evernote. But if you're, a pretty, you have a business and it's been a few years, you're, 50 people to a medium size to an entire huge enterprise, you're not going to want to obviously use Evernote as your place to store all this sensitive stuff, right? So the whole philosophy is kind of do piloting it on Evernote and then eventually moving to other solutions. But the big point here is that it doesn't matter, whether you're using like a log management solution, a SIM, or maybe some other things, right? Is you basically have a piece of data, you need some way to tag it, and you need a good searching capability, and you just throw all that capability into the big bucket, and just having that one place that you can just search for everything associated with it. It's just something that you can't do that I don't see in a lot of organizations right now. So future, definitely what I want to do, there's more feeds that I want to add into it. Some feeds are, some sites in their feeds have slightly different, there are some deconfliction that I have to do. I want to put in more file-based pools, so that's where I would go and pull down some of those text files that I was talking about. finding some way that whenever, like, there's a great site, and I don't have it listed here, but it's a guy on GitHub that puts all the APT reports that come out. Find a way to pull from that to kind of suck that in so that I can search those too. Add more news blogs. So currently I just have 2, so maybe I'll add like 1 or 2 more just so that I can get that, like, understand what was going on around a specific timeline. And then also integrate with maybe some of the different resources. Like I mentioned SIF there. I mentioned Critical Stack, and there's some other things out there too. Maybe that table that I showed you there was just sort of my first shot of a starting structure that somebody could work with. So trying to improve that. Looking at maybe doing some API automation. So I can write an application that I can call into Evernote and do stuff like auto-tagging IPs. Like, hey, run this on a daily basis, search for all the new notes that were created using regex. If you see an IP, tag that note with it. So just some fun stuff like that. And obviously, there's a lot of third-party apps that use Evernote as its backend, sort of like a database. So you could almost come up with, like a case tracking tool or an open source Intel tool or whatever, and you could develop like a whole nother app associated with that. And then maybe even Evernote as a SIM, right? Probably not, but it's just like a fun thing to check with. So the one thing that I like to emphasize here is, like, don't just go out and buy the commercial product. Try to pilot stuff internally first. And this Evernote example is just something that I kind of did this with, so that I could determine, how I would necessarily do this, where the gaps are, and then in the future, whenever I need to go buy a threat Intel feed, I know what I can automate and do internally fairly cheaply and fairly quickly, but identify where those gaps are, and then at least when I go to the threat Intel vendors, I can be very specific about what I need so that I don't get the fire hose of all the information from them. But that's basically all I have. I guess it's loud, so I won't take questions here, but maybe off to the side. But you can read me, Grecs, novaafosec.com is my website. And if you want to contact me, or is this being recorded? Is this, it is? All right, well then, if you want my email, then just talk to me afterwards, since I don't want to put it up there. But anyway, that's all I have. I want to thank the Wall of Sheep team and DEF CON for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all. Thank you.